This is Outside of New York, in-depth discussions with members of the art world who live and work outside of New York. And here's your host, Craig Gould.
Dornith Doherty is an artist whose work stimulates conversations around the world's ever-changing ecology. A native of Houston, she obtained her BFA from Rice University and her MFA in photography from Yale. She currently resides in Southlake, Texas, and is Distinguished Research Professor at the University of North Texas, where she's been on the faculty since 1996. Dornith is a 2012 Guggenheim Fellow and has received grants from the Fulbright Foundation, the Japan Foundation, and the United States Department of the Interior, among many others. In addition, she was recognized by the Texas State Legislature as the 2016 Texas State Artist for 2D work. Doherty's work has been exhibited extensively domestically and abroad and can be found in the permanent collections of prominent institutions such as the Amon Museum of American Art, the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Her project, entitled Archiving Eden, looked at the infrastructure around the preservation of the world's plant life through the utilization of seed banks, as well as looking at the inner beauty of the seeds themselves. That work drew the attention of major media outlets and resulted in a host of artist talks around the world, including TEDx Monterey. I recently sat down with Dornith at her current show at Holly Johnson Gallery in Dallas, where we discussed growing up in Houston, the rigors of the Yale MFA, man's impact on the environment, photographing the world's seed bank vault in the Arctic, backyard coyotes, and the future of the banana. Yeah, I live in Southlake.
Oh, funny.
So, yeah.
we could have.
Right.
Well,
right. Exactly.
But here we are.
We could have met at the library or something.
Right,
but it's
right.
it's nice to get out and be here amongst the work, and this is great.
Okay.
But
great.
Yeah. So what about you? You're a native Texan?
Yes. So I grew up in Houston.
So growing up, did you find yourself especially artistic, or did you gravitate? Where were you like as a kid growing up in Houston? What was that like?
That's a hard question to answer. I was raised by a single mom, mm-hmm. and so we lived right on the edge out in Memorial, so it was still kind of pretty wild at that point. So that was really nice. It turns out I was artistic, and I didn't have a self-awareness, but when I went to my high school reunion recently, like literally all the people I used to hang out were all artists.
That's
and
funny.
It was funny, but we didn't really kind of self-identify as artists because of our, kind of weak art program at the time. Right. And I'd had a really formative experience where I went in high school and volunteered in Guatemala.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, you would take Spanish from third grade on. So when I volunteered in Guatemala, like in my sophomore year, I went and spent the summer in Guatemala. And it was really this kind of profound experience.
Was this a public high school?
Public high school, and it was through Amigos de las Americas. And we were supposed to be giving inoculations. And instead, I opted out of that in favor because there was a lot of worry and rumors that it was actually sterilization, that the U.S. was inoculating the indigenous people to sterilize them. So there was this huge fear portion among the population. And so we were in really this little tiny aldea in the highlands of Guatemala. And what we did instead was a nutritional survey. So we weighed and measured babies.
Oh my gosh.
Because at the time, Nestle had gone in and was trying to introduce their formula and was giving it away for free.
Right.
It's a very famous story. And so the women would dry up, and then they were dependent on buying formula, and they couldn't afford it, so they were diluting it, and the babies were unbelievably, it was a terrible, terrible story. So so we were weighing and measuring babies, and just it was such a culture shock because because of the circumstances of my mom being a single mom, we didn't travel much, and so we were in Houston, and then to go so far away and have this experience was really an eye opener about other places and how people lived, and just really profound. So when I went to school at Rice, I ended up focusing on Spanish language and literature. So I became a Hispanic studies major.
Sure.
In big part because of that. And then I was taking it was at the time of the boom, right after the Latin American boom in literature. So it was a crazy experimental, super interesting body of literature that was coming out of South America that was just so fun to read. So it was like Jorge Luis Borges or Julio Cortázar. So it was like tons and tons of really interesting kind of magical realism, and that tied in with that experience in a really great way. And the Hispanic Studies program at Rice at the time was excellent and filled with such interesting people.
Sure.
So that's kind of my path was, of fiction and through Latin American studies.
No, Rice is a really amazing university that, it's just so small that it just kind of gets overlooked a lot of the time. When I was in high school, I was recruited to play football at Rice.
Oh, very cool.
And I went, they paid for me to come down. We went through the whole recruiting thing. They, had the weekend on the town. And in the end, they're like, oh, well, it was like the night before signing date. And they're like, well, we gave the last scholarship to this other guy, but you can still come here if you want to pay your way. And I wound up, so my path wound up taking me through SMU, but we went down to Houston recently and went back to Rice. I hadn't been there in like 30 years, and just brought back all these memories about, wow, it's such a great school. Maybe I should have just gone and done it. But I remember, on that trip, going to like the Galleria and going to a sports store and saying, hey, do you have any like Rice T-shirts or caps? And the guy's just like, what? Like, what? Rice. Like, I don't understand. What? Like, the school. Like, oh, no. There's we don't have Rice things here, and so. But it's, but I mean, you look at the rankings. I mean, it's just so well respected, and I remember just such a great endowment to like benefit the research and offsetting student costs and.
Yeah.
So what was that? From your first experience, what was your experience like at Rice?
Oh, I had a great experience, and it was tied. And it's interesting that you ended up going to SMU, since physically they look so.
Right.
But the campuses are similar. And,
yeah.
Rice has gone in a much more experimental architecture way. But at the time, probably when you were looking at college, they were more similar than they are now. But my experience at Rice was great, and I had tiny classes and very engaged professors, and never it was really a special time, and it was through a lot of the connection I had with the professors there that kind of led me to this path that I have now.
Right.
Both as an educator and as a professor at UNT, but also in my art career. So, because at the time when I was studying Latin American literature, and I'd picked up a minor in French, And a friend of mine recommended that I take a class in photography. And I had a bunch of friends who were architects, and they were all taking photography, and they just loved it.
Right.
So I, as one, I had taken like a drawing class, a couple other classes. So I went into photography, and I was just blown away. Like, that combination of the metaphoric power of a single image and kind of a modernist view on photography, where they really talked about what were the qualities of the media, and how could you make that medium just really sing. It was really just wonderful. So I had I studied with this guy named Jeff Winningham, who is a well-known photographer. He's had, I think, he had 2 Guggenheims and 3 NEA grants. Really, really accomplished guy. And he's still teaching at Rice, as a matter of fact, which is interesting to think about. And he was influential. So he was starting a program in Mexico. He was taking students down to San Miguel de Allende. And that was right when I was graduating. And I had interviewed with some international companies, and I was like, this is not going to be a match for me.
Right.
I really want to make art. I really want to be a photographer.
Right.
So I talked my way. I convinced him that he needed somebody who spoke Spanish to go with him to San Miguel. And I ended up being a lab assistant, factotum for a couple years in the summers. And then I would work at Rice running their labs in the winter.
Wow.
So it was a great experience.
Yeah. And so at what point, so was it in pretty short order that you realized that, work related to that was going to be the career path? I mean,
well, I did a bunch of different things at the time, just kind of finding my way, because being raised by a single mom, everybody was like, you can't be an artist. You're not going to be able to support yourself. There was just a lot of disapprobation. I mean, they liked what I was doing, but they didn't really see how it was sustainable for me as lifelong. And I encounter that with my students today. The parents they want their very economic security for their children, and what is that about, and this shifting thing. But it's also that I loved it so much, and I loved the process, and I really was committed. But it took me a while to kind of do it. I worked in a photography gallery. I worked as a parrot tamer.
Oh, wow.
I worked. So there was all these different things that I tried at that point.
I've never seen that job posted.
I know, it was really funny, parrot tamer. And that was the summer. That was a funny summer. But so anyway, I ended up kind of slowly, I kept making work and ended up getting a Houston Center for Photography fellowship. Like the first year they offered it. And I thought, well, maybe that is, maybe that's going to make it possible.
Right.
So I went, so that was I kind of tried a bunch of different things in Houston those first years out of college.
Right.
Because I had never even been in a museum until, some high school field trip.
Right.
So that was outside of my, a lot of times, you have to kind of find what is the art world and what are the edges of that and what do people do. Right. But, I was running around with a big crew of artists and we were having just a blast.
Right.
Right. But then there was there was a huge economic downturn in Houston.
Sure.
And so, and I was restless. I felt like I wanted to progress. I didn't want to be a lab tech and a part-time artist the rest of my life. So my husband, who is now my husband, we were living together in Houston, and we applied to grad school at that time. And we went up east and went to grad school after about hanging out for 6 years after graduating from undergrad.
And so you wound up going to Yale and getting your MFA.
Uh-huh.
And so is that where your husband went also?
He got in, but he decided to go to Columbia because he was also, so we lived, it's possible to commute. They're
Right.
only an hour apart, so we lived halfway, and both of us commuted.
Nice.
It was nice.